your brain is being stimulated right now.
They is fucking with your head.
They are. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And seeing becomes believing.
Hi, I'm Jim O'Shaughnessy, and welcome to Infinite Loops. Sometimes we get caught up in what feel like infinite loops when trying to figure things out. Markets go up and down, research is presented and then refuted, and we find ourselves right back where we started. The goal of this podcast is to learn how we can reset our thinking on issues that hopefully leaves us with a better understanding as to why we think the way we think and how we might be able to change that to avoid going in infinite loops of thought. We hope to offer our listeners a fresh perspective on a variety of issues and look at them through a multifaceted lens, including history, philosophy, art, science, linguistics, and yes, also through quantitative analysis. And through these discussions, help you not only become a better investor, but also become a more nuanced thinker. With each episode, we hope to bring you along with us as we learn together. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode of Infinite Loops.
Jim O'Shaughnessy is Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, where Jamie Catherwood is an associate. All opinions expressed by Jim, Jamie, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. Today, I have on one of the more fascinating guys that I have been following and reading for a long time. It is Ben Hunt, the founder of Epsilon Theory, as well as the second foundation partners, Harry Seldon Chops. I love Harry Seldon. I love the
Thank you for
foundation.
noting it, Jim. Thank you for noticing. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of Harry Seldon. You've got over 100,000 subscribers. Basically, what you're doing is you're trying to look at the market, but world as well, through the lens of game theory, history, and narrative. You got some killer quotes, man. And before I get on to what I want you to do, and we discussed earlier, which is going to give you kind of a platform to really make your case for why you're looking at things. I got to ask you, on Twitter, my most commonly seen Ben Hunt tweet is "Burn it the fuck down."
Oh man, you caught me, Jim. You caught me. You know, I'm really trying to do it less. I really am. But shall I tell you about it? You want to?
Yeah, I'm interested. And before you do, I because what I think when I see that, I hear the old neurolinguistic programmers guys who in the 70s, right? So they swore all the time, and they swore to do a hard reset because back in the 70s, people didn't swear in public. Most people, right?
Right.
And so the leaders of this who were very good at this would, like, right in the middle of a seminar with 200 people, say, somebody will ask an innocuous question and they'll respond, "Fuck you." And it like resets everybody, what they call a hard reset. Is that what you're up to?
So you know, it's funny. I saw that notion of a hard reset about interjecting with a slap of hands and a profanity, actually on the most recent episode of Billions. You know,
really,
so
I stopped watching it. So tell me about it.
Well, I honestly, I should stop watching it. I mean, honestly, I know compliment. I think he's a great guy and all, but that show jumped the shark. A couple of seasons ago. To be fair, but I still kind of watch it out of habit. But yes, that was a plot device in the most recent episode. So there is absolutely an element of that in how I use the term, right? Because it's written, when I write it out, it's, capital B burn, period, capital IT, so making it that.
Yeah.
So it absolutely has that element, and it was intended to shock. It was also intended my catchphrase, right? Because it's Twitter after all, and you need a catchphrase, I guess. But my catchphrase prior to that was, "They're not even pretending anymore."
I love that one, by the way. But yeah,
Right? And I need to go back to it. I adopted "burn it the fuck down" when Epstein
yeah,
died in custody, because I was so angry, Jim. I didn't know how to process that event except by "wake the fuck up, people," like
Yeah.
that.
yeah,
And this is actually something interesting. It'll go kind of in our larger conversation about, I think, about metaverse and narratives. And
sure.
I know, you write a lot, you think a lot about it, and so you're a creative type. There's an ego element to writing. I enjoyed the way it made me feel to use that language. And
Cathartic.
It was cathartic. I did get a positive response from it. Right. And so it emboldens the wrong word. It reinforced in me to use that phrase, frankly, more than I should, right? It should not be a catchphrase. It should be, as you mentioned it earlier, that kind of shock event, that clap that's used in those rarest of circumstances. So I don't regret using it. I try not to use it anymore, except in those circumstances when, again, I'm really angry.
Sure.
And I do think it requires that sort of invective that Twitter, the modality of Twitter, is actually pretty well suited for.
Oh yeah.
But so yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up. That's the etymology of it. That's where it originated. It is designed to shock with that sort of hand clap. As our world, we have more and more evidence of our world actually physically being burned down. Right?
Right.
It's not a phrase that I use much anymore, and I want to reserve it for those times when the event deserves that sort of exclamation mark.
Yeah.
So that's the full story.
That's a good story. Actually, another one I had was kind of like, you have a PhD from Harvard. So let's not kid ourselves here. That a lot of people might find that very unapproachable. Like, ooh, he's a PhD from Harvard. He's not going to get what I say, or he's going to dismiss what I say, or, be look down his nose at me. And I know from reading you for years, you're not that kind of guy. So I definitely thought that, I personally thought, I like his reframing here, because it makes you, frankly, it makes you very approachable. And
well, thank you.
When you say things like that, I've used the technique not with "burn it the fuck down," but with the capital and period with each one, right? So the World Economic Forum, I think, is run by lunatics, and
without a doubt.
They have this. I've used it there was their gig. It's 2030 and you own nothing and you're happy. Oh, double plus good, guys. Double plus good.
Right. It is that Orwellian. I knew Klaus Schwab back in the day. I knew him when he first. Yeah. You want to hear that story? I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So this goes back to my Harvard graduate school days. So I'll start with kind of my take on Harvard, and it's an old story. You've probably heard it before, but it's I'm all about narratives and archetypes, stories we tell each other over and over again. And so this is the story of the kid from Alabama, me, going up to Harvard. And as the classic joke goes, the young kid from Alabama is walking through Harvard Yard and kind of marveling at everything. And he's looking around, he's trying to find the library. And so he stops a couple of other students that were there in the yard and says, excuse me, guys, but can you tell me where the library's at? And so, the leader of the group he's talking to draws himself up in his full, Brahmin hood and says, my good fellow, here at Harvard, we simply do not end our sentences in a preposition.
I love that joke. My daughter graduated from Yale, and they tell the same joke about Yale.
Of course they do. And of course the punchline is, oh, well, can you tell me where the library's at, asshole?
Asshole.
Right?
I love
So,
it.
yeah, so it's like that classic joke. And so that I'll let that kind of set the stage of my experience, right, with Harvard. That said, the getting my passport stamped, right, joining the academic church as a PhD from Harvard, it changed my life so much. Clear for the better, but it put me on the path where I can do what I'm doing today, for sure. That said, I've always had the entrepreneurial bug. I know you have too, Jim, and it's if you have it, it is a bug, right? It's not a feature, it's a bug. We can't help ourselves.
Exactly.
But find these entrepreneurial opportunities. And one of the opportunities was that Harvard has this saying in the budgeting process between the different schools of Harvard, which is every tub on its own bottom. And what that means is that each school, from the business school to the law school to the College of Arts and Sciences, they all have to essentially fund themselves. There is no common pot of money that they're allocated. So it lends itself to the very well-heeled schools, like the business school, being the haves in a school like the School of Education,
right? Which has got a begging bowl.
Absolutely. Right? But here was the thing. So what I noticed was that one of the big money makers for the business school is what they refer to as their executive education classes, right? Where you come up and you attend classes, right? You do a couple of cases for a few weeks. You get a certificate. They're not a degree granting program. They're a certificate granting program.
Right.
But it's an enormous moneymaker for HBS and has been for decades. Just enormous moneymaker. So, I had the bright idea. I was like, well, you know what? I could do one of these executive education conferences. I can market it. I can hire the business school professors, which I did, right? So I would hire them to come give a talk.
Yeah.
And I'll have it sponsored by the School of Education. I'll split the revenue with them. Right, I'll charge an arm and a leg to, let's say CEOs, senior management, people with a C in the title from, my focus was Southeast Asia, frankly, right? Because they come over, they listen to a couple of HBS professors give their kind of fun talks. I put them up at the Ritz, back when the Ritz was a nice hotel in Boston, and I, take them out to nice dinners, and they get a certificate at the end that says Harvard University on it.
Right.
And man, that worked.
Yeah.
It was great for the School of Education. It was great for me. I started this company and I had a little office in, Harvard Square, and it all worked great. The brilliance of Klaus Schwab was he made his executive education program a club in and of itself. Right? That was such a brilliant thing, because what he figured out was, and I belatedly got to this, was that once they got the little certificate from Harvard, that wasn't enough. What they really wanted was to then have their reunion meetings, right? They wanted to be with other people who had that certificate from Harvard.
Yeah.
And that's what Klaus figured out. So
brilliant, really.
Klaus was about money from the word go. It's the phrase I like to use. I call them raccoons.
Yeah, no, I
right?
love
So,
he's a raccoon for sure.
He's a raccoon. He's a raccoon from the word go. It was always about the money with Klaus. Frankly, like it was with me when I started those programs. Ultimately, I got shut down because the business school got wind of me hiring the business school professors. they had a meeting. This is when Larry Summers was still there. If you're familiar with the Social Network, that
Oh,
movie,
very,
right?
very familiar, and Larry Summers too. But continue.
Right, where the Winklevi, the Winklevoss twins have their meeting in Larry Summers' office, right? Well, the meeting in Larry Summers' office, around for me was with the dean of the ed school and the dean of the business school, where the education school agreed to stop doing their executive education programs, and in exchange, the business school would give them a cut of money. So
Well,
that's how education works. It's all about the money, Jim, and it's been about the money from the word go with Schwab and the World Economic Forum. It's all about the money.
yeah. No,
He just figured out this great gig. He just
Yeah.
grift. I'll call it a grift. It's been
Totally
a
a
grift from the
grift.
word go.
Totally a grift. And like, I'm sure I stole it from you, but I always say, always ask yourself, why am I reading this now?
Yep.
I know I stole it from you, I'm pretty sure. But I had also been saying, follow the money, because that's where you, like, even really super smart people, I'll say, have you ever done a Google patent search on that and see whose name's attached to it? It drives me crazy when like these really super smart people, like, let me introduce you to this wonderful idea called a search engine that also has its own search engine for patents.
Yeah,
and like,
absolutely right.
It amazes me.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. What I thought would be really great, though, and we chatted about this beforehand, rather than starting with specifics, we'll cover those later, but I really wanted to give you a chance to, kind of in line with your recent series, give you a chance to talk about your view and your take, the way you frame the idea of the metaverse and the objectives, some good, some bad, of some very famous and powerful players, and how that's going to affect mostly markets, but I'd also be interested in extending it a little to society at the whole.
Sure.
Are you good for that? Are we good to do that?
I am so good for that. I'm so good for that. So, where I'd start, Jim, is that I've spent my adulthood, right, my professional career, trying to understand the power of words, of narratives, right? This was my PhD research. This was, I wrote a book. This was my academic career. It was focused on political science, not investing in markets, but it's all about how we, as a social animal, in the technical sense of the word, right? The E.O. Wilson, the E.O. Wilson sense of the word.
Yeah, we as domesticated primates, right?
Yeah. Well, it's that's it. That technical sense of social animal is, and the reason I mentioned E.O. Wilson, who's this amazing writer, but his focus was on ants.
I know.
Ants, right?
Yeah.
And his larger point, or his larger interest, where he connected ants to human beings, was in this idea of us being technically a social animal. And by technically a social animal, there are these different characteristics like multiple generations, care for the brood in the nest. There are all these technical words that apply to insects, right? Because most social animals are insects. The four social animals that we all know about and are the most common social animals are ants, bees, termites, and Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not a coincidence that those four species are, I'd argue, certainly E.O. Wilson would argue, the most successful species on Earth. Right?
Absolutely.
We are basically a giant termite, right, with opposable thumbs, the ability to use fire, and language, because that's the hallmark of a social animal. in the technical sense of the word. It is intra-species communication, right? All four of those species I just named, all four of them and us, we swim in an ocean of signals and communications from our own kind. For most of those insects I mentioned, it's chemical communications, it's pheromones and the like. For humans, it's language, it's words. But the impact, the way that we are evolved over millions of years and socially trained over tens of thousands of years is identical. We respond to words in exactly the same way that a bee would respond to the pheromones of its queen.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt, but Dawkins' original definition of memes,
Yes,
which has nothing to do with cute photos. It has to do with the fitness of a communication, usually in words, right?
Yep.
Like, for example, I saw one of your quotes saying that, you know, St. Paul was like communicating vis-a-vis the metaverse, and that really dovetailed very nicely with a concept that I had, which was, upon reading it, realizing that Saul, who became Paul, was literally the first memer in religion, in that he had his precepts, right? I don't remember how many, there were 130 or something like that.
right.
But the beauty, or the fascination I had with Paul was he was the first person that I can find who was saying to everyone who would listen, it doesn't matter where you were born. It doesn't matter what sex you are. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what tribe you're from. You don't have to worship your ancestral gods. This is the real God. Come on, we have room for everybody here.
Yeah, it's what you just described is true for, I would say, I don't mean be pejorative for others, but I'll say for all the great religions.
Yeah.
Right. There's a very, very conscious focus on the words, small w plural, and the word with a capital W. It's the first, right. No, it's it's the first line of the book of John, right? God is the Word,
and the Word is good,
and
the Word is God.
The Word is God, right? It's putting language at the center, right? Language is not just the means by which an idea is communicated. Yes, it's that. And words themselves, the word, it is what makes us human.
Yeah, the limits of my language are the limits of my life. That's
Wittgenstein, right?
Wittgenstein, right?
Wittgenstein,
So,
exactly right.
Yeah,
That's exactly it, right? So I've been immersed in this world of words and language and how they impact us, how we're hardwired to respond to words and language. And then my research, both in political science and now in markets, has been in the ways in which, frankly, words and language are used against us. And I really mean that, against us, against all of us, our human interests, and in service to what I like to call is the nudging state, the nudging oligarchy, because that's how power is exercised today, I believe, right? The power of the state, the power of a giant corporation, right? For their own power interest. It's not a jackbooted thug stepping on your face, right? The image of 1984.
Yeah. It's more Brave New World, right?
It is absolutely more Brave New World, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to make the 1984 comparison, it's the use of language.
And that's why I said double plus good.
Double plus good, right? That's exactly right. Because when you eliminate words, and that was the whole notion of Ingsoc, right? The language, right, of 1984, the idea was to remove words from the language. to remove
Actually,
them.
again, my thought would be the real goal was to remove the ability to think differently.
That's my point.
Using words, right?
That's right, Jim. Because to the point you're making, the language defines, but if you don't have the words for something, you can't think it.
That's right.
Man, that's control.
Totally.
The flip side is true as well. And this is the flip side of great philosophers and religious figures. If you introduce new words, you're able to think new thoughts. You're able to see the world in a profoundly different way. So, for example, the first revelation to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, and in that theology, the angel Gabriel came to Muhammad and the command was read. Read. For Allah is the word. Right?
Yeah.
The Siddhartha, right? When he becomes the Buddha, right, sitting under the Bodhi tree, right? The phrase is touch the earth, right? To link with what is real, right? To see the world again not as a progression of self, but as not self. Anyway, I can get all metaphysical with you as much as you like, Jim. But this is the point, right? That if you don't have the words for something, you can't think the thoughts for it. If you don't think, that's the core of it. And if you don't think that Mark Zuckerberg gets that, you're sadly mistaken. He absolutely gets that.
Yes, he does.
And so what I mean by the metaverse is not, it's, this virtual place where you have your little avatar and you go, talk. No, what I believe is the metaverse is that world of language. And language, it's both our superpower as humanity, because it does allow us to think new thoughts and create beauty and joy. And it's also our Achilles heel, because we are hardwired to respond to language and words used in certain ways. And I think that is intentionally being done by organizations of power for their own interests. And the cost we pay, Jim, at the end of the day, is that I think we lose our autonomy of mind. To your point, we lose the ability to think certain thoughts.
Yeah, I once wrote that many think that language is for enlightenment. I often wonder whether it is not for confinement.
I think that, and this was the point of these articles I was trying to write here, it's both, Jim.
Right.
It's both. But what we are immersed in today is a world where everyone's kind of figured this out, right? That whether you're talking about markets, or whether you're talking about politics, or whether you're talking about any sort of social interaction, the story's the thing, much more so than the reality, right? Much more so than touching the earth, right? It's, can I tell you a story? And if I tell it long enough and with the right words, will you believe it? So that's what I do, Jim. I try to understand what are the structures of these stories, these archetypes, I like to call them, because example I like to use is that TV show Law and Order, right? Over 600 episodes have been filmed. There are only about a dozen basic scripts for Law and Order. Yeah.
Well, guys, Joseph Campbell might argue there are maybe only about a dozen scripts for anything, right?
That's my point. That's exactly my point, Jim. It's a little bit more than a dozen, but there's a finite number of scripts. And whether we're talking about investing, whether we're talking about our political lives, we tell the same stories to ourselves over and over and over again. And what I really believe, Jim, is that there are two types of stories that have been adopted by, again, I call it the nudging state, right? The nudging oligarchy, big corporations. And these are the archetypes, the grammars, if you will, are stories of the other right? And stories of transactions, which we are hardwired to respond to these stories. But what it does, Jim, is that it crowds out the stories of Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and every other great religious figure and non-religious figure. It crowds out the stories of a Socrates, an Aristotle, right? A Martin Luther King Jr. It crowds those stories out. And when I say crowded out, this is kind of the hook of the story that I think got a lot of people thinking. I don't just mean in a ethereal, non-physical way. My strong belief is that at the neuron level in our brains, these stories of transactions and they rewire our neurons. That our neural clusters, the way we understand language, we again are hardwired to respond to certain grammars. That's and in this kind of weird sense, what is the metaverse? Well, the metaverse, I believe, is as real as the macroverse, the world that you and I are sitting in. It's as real as the microverse, the world where viruses and microbes and bacteria live. It's an invisible world, like the microverse, but it's no less real for being invisible. What is it? It is the quadrillions of human neurons across billions of human brains that are linked together by these linguistic structures, these grammars, these archetypes of story, the story arc that we can talk about, right? The narrative archetypes we talk about. This is what drives how we think. And there is a real effort today to weaponize these grammars and these narrative structures. You know, the Facebook whistleblower, I'm blanking on her name right now, but she's talking about exactly this, right? Where the content, I'll pick on Facebook for a while because they certainly deserve it, is designed to trigger those dopamine and norepinephrine receptors in our brains, right? And it results in a reconfiguring of our brains at a neural level, right? Which sounds crazy, but is absolutely true.
So I don't think that sounds crazy at all, because this is one of my favorite areas of research. And they absolutely change even the shape of our brain.
Correct.
And it isn't just words, though. I guess if I was going to make a suggestion or offer another area that I think has a huge impact on us as a species, is this idea of aggregate social evolution. The guy who wrote the book, The Weirdest People in the World, makes a really good case for that. It isn't just language, although language is the most powerful because we've had it the longest.
Yep.
But it is also writing. Like the book was a killer app, so to speak, because it allowed us to, in Wilson's words, time bind our ideas and thoughts. And you and I could have a conversation with Aristotle even today.
Correct.
By reading his work. And one of the things that really made me interested in The Weirdest People in the World was they actually showed that the brain scans of literate people, highly literate people, and then brain scans of people who are illiterate, our brains are formed differently. Literally, the learning to read borrowed from the part of our brain that normally goes for facial recognition, which in a tribe environment, that's pretty important. Yep. And so ours, yours and mine, and anyone listening to this show, hopefully, right. We have different brain shapes than the person who has never been taught to read. So I think that you're correct in the weaponizing of words and all of that, but haven't we been doing that a long time?
Well, we have, Jim. I'll make one point though, that those changes in the the morphology of our brains, it doesn't mean we're smarter, right? At all.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely not.
What it means is that I think of language, frankly, you can think of it as like a parasite, right? It's like a virus,
Right.
literally like a virus, and it does kind of, or a symbiote maybe is the better way to describe it.
Oh, see, the problem here, Ben, is like you're using all these words that like I love, and so you're making me think of all these things.
Yeah, see?
that are going to get me to interrupt you.
But this is the beauty of language, right? It allows us to make new connections and to think. And the purpose of the use of words and language and grammatical structures by the nudging state and the nudging oligarchy is just the reverse, right? The intention is to make us think fewer new thoughts. It's the intention is to domesticate us, right? Not through selective breeding, but like we have with animals for tens of thousands of years, but through selective narratives. And you're right, this has been an effort since people existed.
Yeah.
What's changed today though, Jim, and I'm gonna, hold it up so you can see, is a little portable dopamine machine.
Yeah, I got one here too.
Right. The smartphones, the devices that we are all, and I mean this word literally, addicted to.
Yep.
So
there's mine.
Yep. We all have them. We're all, and they are our windows onto the metaverse, so that we are exposed to. And again, I'm using that word deliberately because it's like being exposed to a virus. We're exposed to these messages, these stories of transactions and stories of othering constantly. Right. So two big differences today than versus 100 years ago. One, we are always plugged into the metaverse and the linguistic viruses that come out from the metaverse. Again, I mean this in a physical sense. It physically rewires our neurons. And the second is it's a intensive effort by big tech, big politics, big media to weaponize those viruses for maximum impact on our brain chemicals.
Good. Okay, so let me stop you there because I have several questions. The first book I ever read about memes was called Viruses of the Mind. It was written by a Microsoft guy, I think, in the late 90s. And I became very interested in it because I thought, much like you think, that that it was going to impact markets ultimately and impact them pretty seriously. But one of the other things that always stops me somewhat is, we're quants, right? We are entirely quants. So I want to be able to study something as far back in time as possible. I want to use base rates. I want to do all of that kind of stuff. And one of the things that emerges from this research is that narrative follows price, not the other way around, at least in the market. So price moves for, at the time, often reasons that no one knows about or understands. I'll give you a great example. So as a quant, I don't care what names are in my portfolio. I care about the underlying factors of those names, but I don't care about the names. And so in the early 2000s, our most aggressive growth strategy, which was a small cap, but also had a momentum factor, all of a sudden started buying a bunch of tiny steel companies. And so I called my analysts in. We're looking at the screen. I call my analysts in. I'm like, anyone going to explain why we're buying these tiny steel companies? Well, about 6 months later, right as one of the most prominent stories in the Wall Street Journal, China building the equivalent of one Boston every month. And what were they using to build those cities? Steel, right? So my point is, we were buying those steel stocks because of price momentum, basically, and that they were cheap. And the story didn't catch up for many, many months. So how do you square that with the idea that perhaps the inverse, which is narrative causes price?
So I'll tell you, Jim, both of those causal patterns exist, right? Price action will always ultimately create a narrative. Example I'll give you, right? So let's say we're in earnings season and, for whatever idiosyncratic reason, you've got, I'll pick on the financial sector, right? So, two banks, come out and they, disappointing earnings, what have you. And those stocks are down, whatever they're down that day. Right? And over the course of that week, right? So the whole financial sector is down, whatever that week. What I promise you is that over the next, immediately afterwards for a couple of sell side reports, and then more generally as it spreads like a virus in other media channels like the Journal or Bloomberg or what have you, is there will be a why. We will have explained to us the reason why that those stocks are down, right. And why, you should be, bearish on that sector now, or why, oh, no, but we're still bullish because of XYZ, right?
Right.
As a human animal, we are driven by the why. It's not the what, it's not the fact, it's not the event. We must have a why for us to take action, for us to buy or to sell.
So I'm sorry, I got to stop you
Yeah,
again.
go on.
Because
Yeah, go.
I have two areas that I think you might be interested in. I'm reading a book about the scientific power of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And essentially, the author makes a very good case from looking at research that replicates that essentially all of us, me, you, everyone,
yep.
we're all confabulating unreliable narrators. and,
yes.
and they prove it pretty well.
Yes.
People who've had their brain split because of epilepsy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people are left-brained. The verbal, or as what do the kids call it now, the word cell part.
The word cell, right? Yeah.
And of course the image side of the right hemisphere, very different, isn't language oriented, etc. And one of the things they do is with the people who've actually had surgery to split their brain.
Yep.
To prevent all the horror of the epileptic
fits.
Yep. Yeah. So they'll show a card that says walk. And here's what just blows me away, at least, is the person will get up and start to walk. When queried, the why, the confabulating, unreliable narrator makes up a story on the fly.
On the fly. Absolutely right.
I'm walking because I want to get a Coke. I'm walking because I need to use the restroom. And so, like, one of the things that I've been persecuting in the way I try to get people to think about things is you need to understand this. You need to understand that you are often, verse Professor Feynman's fine advice, you're often and continually fooling just yourself.
Yeah.
And
but here, Jim, I'll give you another example that doesn't even rely on, a study of, cutting that corpus callosum or whatever they do for separating the reds. This is a recent study that came out. I mean, we will create a story of cause and effect, even when the sensory perception to our eyes, it's reversed.
Yes.
We can't help ourselves. We have to create causality and a story of causality.
Yes.
And there, I'm going to bring it back to investing here, though, Jim, because what we try to measure is then the creation of that story post the whatever event occurred that created the story. And so what we're tracking is not just the creation of the story, but then its spread. Yeah. What we call common knowledge. When everyone, and what we mean by that basically is when that story, here's what's going on with the banks. When that story appears in your Bloomberg, morning email, right? that's when you need to fade the story.
Yes, I agree.
So from an investing perspective, that's when you want to then buy the banks,
Yeah.
right? So there is, you're absolutely right, that events create a story, because we as humans, we create stories. The unreliable confabularies say we will always create a story to explain what just happened.
Yep.
And then when that story spreads, when everybody goes, oh yeah, that's what's happening, actually that's the time you fade it, because it's just made up. It's a made up story that more likely than not has nothing to do with the reality. But I'm going to give you another example of the way this process can work as well, Jim, which starts with the story, right? And so I'm going to use an example not of some, event shock that happens to companies or corporations, positive or negative, but I'm going to use the intentional effort to create a narrative on, like our central bankers have done, right? So this is, they're very upfront about it. This is communication policy. This is forward guidance. This is all the phrases they use to describe this. And it is intentionally the use of words to create a behavior where the words are not reflective of what, a central banker actually thinks or believes, but the words are there to create that response in you.
Sure.
Right? What we might call lying under other circumstances, but hey, it's all right. This is a situation, Jim, where the narrative comes first, and then the price movement responds to that. Right? So what you're describing is absolutely right. Events occur in the world, and then we make up stories to explain them. Yeah. And then what you want to do is you want to measure the spread of that story, because you want to go the other way.
Sure.
Right? You want to fade the story. And then there are other stories that are used that intentionally so that are actually the spark or the driver of a direct implication. Now, here's the point, Jim. What I just described to you is what a good trader does every day. Mm-hmm. Every day they sit in front of a screen and they'll see a piece of news come across the screen. And the question is, do I press it or do I fade it? Do I press it or do I fade it? And that's what I think is the benefit of this but a highly systematic and methodological review understanding of narrative, where we actually measure what are called the n-grams, the units of grammatical meaning, to give you a sense, do I press the story or do I fade it?
Yeah.
That's what we do in our research, because what you're describing is absolutely right. And we are hardwired to respond to it. And it can work both for the story to create the behavior and the story to come as a reaction to price. It goes back and forth, because that's who we are as human animals.
So that's really interesting. And it makes me think of two questions. Well, the first is more of an observation, and that is, I am endeavoring a new research project, and I'm lucky in that I always assume the null hypothesis. I always assume that I'm wrong. Just easier that way. And it centers around the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I was having a conversation with, I would rank this person as one of the most gifted programmers in machine learning and theorists. And I asked him a question that he called me back like a week later, because he had to think about it. I'm like, so picking up on your theme.
Yeah.
I said, do you think it's going to be difficult for the average investor or even people who are sitting where I'm sitting on the asset management side? Do you think it's going to be difficult for them to accept the results of machine learning that only say to them when, not why, when, what? No why. And he was caught like for a moment, because he'd never thought about that. He'd never thought about our base code DNA really cares about why more than it cares about anything else, and it will invent all sorts of bullshit stories to describe the why. But so that leads to my question, and that is, aren't there like large groups of people, well, the traders that you cite, for example, that who make their careers going against fading or pressing, right?
Mhm.
I mean, there does seem to me, at least to the people I'm acquainted with, and good Lord knows I don't know all the people in the world, but
Yeah.
I would certainly think that like those are going to be the hard people to get to start referring to things as double plus good.
I think you're right, because what a good trader has figured out is how to maintain critical distance,
Yes.
right? That they don't take it into their hearts. Now, when we do that as a society, though, Jim, I think we lose a lot, right? Because what we lose is any sort of trust we have in any of our leaders. Now, frankly, my view is our leaders, and this is not on any end of the spectrum, they've done nothing to gain our trust, and they've done everything to abuse our trust. So yeah, I'm not saying at all, oh, we need to trust. No, they've done nothing but abuse our trust. And the reason I think they've abused our trust so egregiously is that they've all kind of gotten in on the idea that, oh, if I can just nudge you, if I can just use the right words, right, I can make you do what I want. And that's not how it freaking works, Jim. That is so not how it works, right? It's a child's version of what they think, you know, nudging and the like works, but everybody is trying to do it. CEOs, right? This is what it means to be a successful CEO today. It's not operational efficiency, it's narrative efficiency. Can I create a good story that drives a better multiple?
Yeah.
Right?
So
it's
Ben,
crazy, man.
Question.
Yeah.
I accept the premise that we are narrative-based creatures. I accept the premise that why. I have certainly been on the record. I like try to avoid politics publicly at like it's the plague, because it kind of is. It's an emotional plague of people's minds being abused by these people. I am on record as saying we have the worst political class in the history of this country. And I think the pandemic, if it taught us anything, taught us that it ain't just us. It is worldwide.
It's global.
The political class, to use your term, has turned into a bunch of grifting raccoons who are trying to suck as much money and as much power out of the system as possible. And well, it seems to me we have a choice here. Are we going to let them do this, or are we going to have the moment where the little girl says, "The emperor has no clothes on"?
Yeah, and that's what I tried to wrap up this 3-note series. What do we do about it? Right? What do we do about this, Jim? Right? And I will tell you, I don't think that I'll call it a top-down approach really works here.
But yeah, top-down. It's a complex adaptive system, and if you know anything about complex adaptive systems, all emergence comes from below.
It comes from below.
And that's why all the command from the top economies collapsed, because they had to.
Yeah. So in my view, so Jim, here's what the answer is not. The answer is not a new political party, that some billionaire creates, right? That is not the answer. By the same token, the answer is not within one of the existing political parties either.
I agree.
It's just that's not where this can happen. Would it be helpful, right, to do antitrust and kind of break up Facebook into component parts and Google? I kind of think it would. I think it would be helpful on the margins. I actually really do, but that's not my focus. Right? My focus is, well, what, if anything, is to be done from the bottom up? Right. And where I come back to, Jim, is that notion that what we are being immersed in, and what is literally making us sick, right? What is literally domesticating us, what is literally changing the thoughts we are able to think, is the inundation we have with these messages and stories of transactions, right? Where everything is a transaction, and the stories of othering. And the stories of othering, I think there are a couple of types, within each of these narrative grammars. It really is a linguistic study, right? They're like different languages. There's the language of, I'll call them tribal grammars, right? One is othering. Here's the other. You must hate them. We're not Americans. We are either, red or blue, and the other side is, the evil, right? There's also tribal narratives in the sense of asking you to look at the crowd, and what drives, again, our hard wiring to respond to the crowd seeing the crowd, what's common knowledge. We write a lot about that. Yep. So I think that one thing we can do, and it's using the technology we have available in the same way that Martin Luther used the printing press, a technology that was available to him to create his Reformation. Because remember, what was at the core, right, of Martin Luther and the Reformation? It was two things, right? One was, we're sick and tired of
indulgences,
transactions. A transaction, right? Where you can buy your way into heaven, right? So that was one, transaction narratives. And the other was, again, someone telling you how to think about the world. Right. That the truth of salvation, in Martin Luther's case, was then told to you by the priestly caste. You couldn't figure it out yourself. You had to be told how to think about your world life. The printing press helped Martin Luther enormously. I think there are technologies that can help us enormously for our secular version of this. And what I mean by that is, this is the big project I want to have in mind. I call it a narrative early warning system, NEWS. It's a browser app that identifies in real time the linguistic structures of those transactional narratives, of those tribal narratives, so that when you're reading that, BuzzFeed, article online, or you're reading, the Facebook post from, MAGA Central, right? It'll just highlight for you, hey, you know what you're reading right now is a transactional narrative.
And are you actually developing that app?
Yeah, actually developing that right now. Okay,
so that seems very cool to me. I think that I certainly don't think we differ on the hopes of this nudging class. I personally probably have a lot more faith in what's emerging now in terms of like the largest variance amplifier that the world has ever seen, the internet, and the ability of people of talent to use it as a lever, Archimedes-like. I'm not all positive. It's good, right? I think we're moving from a world that was designed by institutions for the 68% in the middle of the Bayesian, the bell curve. Yep. And I think we're moving to a Mandelbrot chaotic distribution pattern where the middle is very peaky and the tails are very long. And so I think a lot of great things are going to happen to people on the right side of the tail. I'm not worried about them. It's the people on the left side of the tail that I'm worried about. And that I think we collectively need to think a lot about, because it's also the first time in history, as best as I can tell, and I love history and I've read a lot of it, it seems to me that this is the first time in history where people, and I'll use your dot. Yeah. True, period, no, period, fault, period, of, period, their, period, own. Yeah. Right? Are going to not be able to make use of this new variance maximizing machine adequately. So I very much believe that I completely concur with your the nudging state, the nudging oligarchs, the nudging nudging CEOs. The only thing I might say is, well, fuck, they've always been that way.
Yeah.
Edward Bernays, fucker kid number one, right? The way he got women to smoke was calling them torches of liberty.
Yeah.
You can't
The
make
difference
this shit
today,
up.
Jim, the difference today, though, Jim, is that there's no exit, right? To use a Sartre, play, right? There's no exit, right? We are. I can't give up my smartphone. I can't give it up, right? And I tell myself, no, I have to have it. But I'm addicted to it, right? So there is an up and to the right arrow for technology, right? So we can't uninvent a smartphone, right? What I'm describing is that we have to find a way, I think.
Countermeasures.
Or what's that?
Countermeasures. You are trying to,
I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to do two things, Jim. One is the countermeasure, right? And the other, this is going to sound weird, but I'm going to say it anyway, is to be like the Irish monks in the Dark Ages.
Have you seen the book How the Irish Saved the World?
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? It saves the world, saves civilization, and it's true, right? So when the world collapsed, those men, right? We're talking about monks in a monastery, wrote down all the old stories.
Yep.
All the old books.
Yep.
Right? And preserved them for a time when they could be available for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other big project I have in mind, Jim. I think that what we have today is a world where the universal stories of empathy, of love, of sacrifice, of self-reflection and self-knowledge, I think those stories are being either, directly pushed out, say in a Chinese state regime, right, where you can't read certain things, and these small L liberal words of wisdom, right, are not available to you.
Yeah.
But they're also not available. So I think they're also crowded out and pushed aside by, I'll pick on, Disney narratives, right? Narratives of transaction and tribalism. So the other project I have in mind, Jim, is that to make these texts and these stories inviolable, right? Put them in a blockchain, create a protocol where they cannot be, where they can be archived. It's an arc for stories.
I love it.
But here's the flip side of that coin, Jim. I also want it to be able so that we can also communicate those stories, so that you can have a device, right, that is not being able to be jammed or blocked by a great internet wall like in China, or by a great transactional capitalist wall like we have here, that acts as not a hard wall for your access to the texts that make us human, right? Mm-hmm. But that's the countermeasure that I think can really change things, Jim, because it is our birthright as human beings to have access to all of these stories, these universal stories, many of them found in great religious text, but also found in great secular texts too. And it's not trying to say this one's good or bad, but it's saying this is what makes us human, and they must be A, preserved, and A, be available to all.
Listen,
I think that's the antidote.
I mean, I fucking love that. That's one of my missions too, really, is to show people there are lots of different ways and lots of different things that you should experiment with, that you should read, you really need to read. And so I understand that I am fighting a Sisyphean battle here. Mm-hmm. But wasn't it Camus who said, imagine Sisyphus happy?
Sartre.
Sartre.
Right. You must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Well, right? Because the point there was, we are larger than transactions.
Correct.
We need purpose.
Need purpose.
That's right for us. We need purpose, and those stories lead us, sometimes haltingly, but many times rapidly, into understanding. And I'm sure that it's apocryphal because we say that Mark Twain said everything, or him or Oscar Wilde. So I remember it as a Twain quote. Probably isn't, but he said, the two most important days in your life are when you are born and the day you figure out why. And
it's the why.
It's
about the why, Jim.
Yeah. And Ben, what you're saying is the second project, the first project sounds like a pretty neat
I think so.
investing app. The second one, though, that would be the one I'd be more interested in. And how do you? And now I'm going to ask you why.
Yeah.
Why? How are you going to make that available to everybody?
I don't know, Jim.
That's okay.
I don't know.
That doesn't disqualify.
I know parts of it, right? I know what needs to happen. So in a few weeks we'll be announcing a large gift by a family, a PAC member, as we call them here at Epsilon Theory, to a large research university to set up a research center for narratives.
Oh, that's great.
And as part of that, I really want to pursue these two projects I mentioned. The idea of narrative early warning system, right? An app that it can actually alert you, say, oh, you're reading something. By the way, you're being your brain is being stimulated right now. They
is fucking with your head.
They are. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And seeing becomes believing, because otherwise it's the water in which we swim, Jim. We don't ever see it. It doesn't register. Right. So that's project number one.
Yeah.
Project number two is, I'm good at acronyms, right? So the acronym is NOAA, right? So it's a narrative omni archive for humanity. And the first step is to literally collect all the stories, those finite number of stories that we have in humanity, collect them all.
Yeah.
And now is the technology we have, this is natural language processing, we can see the connections between all those stories is what makes us human. And then the next step, so we'll slab it, right? We want to design a blockchain protocol so that they are inviolable.
Yeah.
It really is like an arc but an arc of stories, not an arc of animals or the arc of seeds like they have up in Iceland somewhere, but an arc of stories. And then it's the big task is, how do we make those stories available
and
to every human? Exactly, to every human in the world as their birthright.
I love it.
Is it a device, right, that can't be jammed by, control of the internet? I don't, and that's why I don't have the answer for. But by God, that's what I'm playing for. That's the purpose.
Listen, Ben, I love that. I absolutely love that. And as you move closer and closer, please keep me in mind. I would be delighted to be involved in something like that.
You got it, Jim.
Especially the ability to make it ubiquitous and worldwide, and that can't be stopped. I love that.
Exactly. It can't be stopped by either, like the Chinese government, and it also can't be stopped by Disney. Right?
Well, that's absolutely, that's a very, and I know I'm going to piss off some of my listeners there, but Disney butchers pretty badly in many respects. These are classic fairy tales originally, right?
Yeah.
And it's gotten worse as we come closer and closer to where we live now. If you watch old Disney stuff, it was not word for word, but it was pretty close to the original fairy tale that they were recreating, if you will. But I think that, and the reason that Disney is a good company to use is because they are there ostensibly to entertain.
Yeah, they've domesticated the stories, Jim. And I get it. They've domesticated the stories, right? So, like, say, you read some of the old, Brothers Grimm stories, and like those aren't kids' stories, right? Those are cautionary tales.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I was just reading a piece this Sunday about Irish fairy tales.
Mhm.
They ain't fairy tales.
No, no. But I get it, and I don't begrudge Disney doing what Disney does. What I'm
By the
saying
way,
is there needs to be an alternative.
Right.
Yeah.
And I should insert here, I do not either.
Right.
I do not.
Right. I know you
begrudge
don't.
them. Yeah.
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 Exactly. No, I think they're brilliant at what they do. We need to be equally brilliant, though, at preserving our humanity, which is a physical metaverse, right? It's just invisible. We can't see it, but it's all of these quadrillions of nerve cells, the neurons that we have across billions of brains. And just because it's organized in this kind of networked way that we can't see, like I can see you and you can see me, doesn't make it any less real, any less biological. And I think once we recognize that, we get on such a better foundation to do all sorts of cool things, Jim.
I think, Ben, this is awesome. I think that you're absolutely right. People who are what I would call 100% materialists, if they can't see it and refute it, thus, like Samuel Johnson tried to, they're just getting in the way. Because if I gave you some infrared glasses, oh my God, look at all these light spectrums that I didn't know I was surrounded
Exactly,
by.
Jim. Exactly.
So
exactly.
It is the world of the interconnectedness. I love that. I've been studying that forever. I want to get involved on that second part. Because it's such a thumb in their eye that I love.
That's right.
It's just like, you know what? Fuck off, go away to the raccoons.
Yeah, Jim, this has been the greatest thing for me, the most personally gratifying thing for me in writing Epsilon Theory, and then having tens of thousands of people from all over the world who come together around this. We're not alone.
Yeah,
we're not alone, Jim. And I got to tell you, when I started Epsilon Theory, I was feeling pretty darn alone. Right? Because these aren't things that it's easy to talk about with, the person, maybe you're in a cubicle next to you or what have you. But there are so many of us, Jim, who want to put that thumb in the eye of the nudging state, the nudging oligarchy, not just for the point of burning it the fuck down, not just for the point of sticking a thumb in someone's eye, but for the point of preserving and building our humanity.
Listen, I love that. I'm sure that I have many disagreements on the sub levels, but that's okay.
That's okay.
If we're up here at I was thinking, because one of the quotes that I loved that I was gonna, if we had more time, I was gonna read to you because it was so great. I'm gonna read it to you anyway. The U.S. Treasury is the Eye of Sauron. From Tolkien. A gigantic panopticon that's that sweeps the world with its unblinking gaze. I love that.
And it has the advantage of being true. That is what the Treasury is. Yeah,
of course it is. And like I used to have a very young physical therapist, and he had been educated just in that, right? So the history, all of that, like he hadn't taken many of those classes, and so he would be there working on me for like 2 hours. And I'm Irish, so I can't shut up. And so I'm talking to him, and he asked me a question, and I'm like, oh, okay. So well, you need the progress, if you will, of humanity, and what it became was explaining to him how the original gangsters were the Romans, right? The Pax Romana. Oh, there was a reason why there was peace, because they were nasty motherfuckers to anyone who killed a Roman citizen. They would march to that town, They would find his relatives. They would kill them. They would hang them from the trees. They would burn his house and his farms to the ground, and they would salt the ground so it would never grow again. And I said, we told the story all the way up to who is the current OG? Well, America is.
Yeah.
And
you know, there's so much that, I mean, but you're right. I mean, our word decimate, right? Because it was not just, that was the punishment for their own legions. One out of every 10 men was executed, right?
Boom.
If you disobeyed or did something wrong, that's decimate, right? 1 out of every 10 was killed.
Yeah.
So there's these are also part of the old stories.
Sure.
Jim, and this is part of the human condition and what we have to acknowledge about ourselves. But I think it's only by that, right, that our better angels can emerge. And that's what this is all about. You know, Jim, I want to raise one more thing, because you mentioned this earlier about disagreeing on, you know, different aspects of all this. Thank God, right? Right? We disagree. But here's how we can disagree, Jim. Because I know that when I disagree with you or you disagree with me, we're approaching these questions with a full heart.
Right. Sure.
Right? We're not
we have no agenda. We don't want, we're not trying to monetize them.
Exactly. It's not a transaction, Jim.
Right.
We're not treating each other as a means to some end. Right? We're treating each other as autonomous human beings with the ability to think for ourselves and to differ and disagree on, and we may disagree on a lot of things, right?
Absolutely.
And very vehemently.
Sure.
But it's okay. And that's the phrase that, look, when we talk about kind of the old stories, that can see kind of, old fogies like you and I are, we're old guys, right? We don't want to be these kind of grumpy grandpas. Read your
back in my day.
Read your Thucydides, young man. Right? But what I'm talking about is the old stories. You can hear them in Friday Night Lights, right? Which is a great book and a great TV series. What is the catchphrase there? Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose.
Can't lose.
That's what we're talking about. Clear eyes, see the world as it is.
Yep.
Full hearts.
Yep.
Treat others as you would have them treat you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And we can't lose. We can't lose, Jim.
I'm going to have you back on because I think we have like another podcast length conversation that you've jogged in my mind. Unfortunately, I have to go, but this one is going to actually be super fun for me because at the end of every podcast, I ask my guest, I'm going to make you the emperor of the world for one day. You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a re-education camp, but you can. You've seen the movie Inception, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you can do is I'm going to hand you a magical microphone, and you can speak into that microphone, and the entire population of the world is going to be incepted with the two things you say into that microphone. The next day, they're going to wake up, they're going to think they thought of it themselves, and they're going to pursue it with vigor. What are the two things that you're going to give me?
First thing is going to be read.
Oh.
Same command the angel Gabriel gave to Muhammad.
Yep.
And the second is going to be touch the earth.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Which is the secret of the Buddha, right? To understand how to move forward in this crazy world. Read, touch the earth.
I love it. Those are both perfect. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time. I will invite you back after I've digested all of this stuff.
Fantastic, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Cheers, Ben.